Welcome back to Upside Down Data. We need to talk about Avalanche. If you're not familiar, Avalanche is a layer 1 protocol. That means that decentralized applications can build on top of it. A lot of decentralized finance applications have built on top of Avalanche. It also has connections to crypto gaming. A lot of games have actually chosen to build on top of Avalanche Rails. And it is, of course, very fast and cheap to use and scalable. So there are a lot of things that has going for it over something like Ethereum, for example, which is a lot slower and a lot less scalable, but is the largest layer 1 protocol that exists right now. So if we go and look at the recent price action of Avalanche, we can see that it has done decently well off of the election day. We're up about 50% from there, so not anything to laugh at by any means, but also not as impressive as some other assets in the crypto space. So I think the question that everyone is asking is, how high can it run? Is it going to be able to continue rallying? Will it be able to set new year-to-date highs? And more importantly, is it possible it could set new all-time highs? So let's go ahead and break it down. So I want to start off by talking about some of our models that we have here at the channel and what they are seeing. So this is our risk model, the upside downside potential indicator. This is the short-term version of the model. Cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, so shorter in its time horizon. And basically high values mean high risk, low values mean low risk. And you can see it's done a great job with Avalanche, telling you good times to be selling and also good times to be acquiring. Now, off of this local bottom we had back here in August, we had dipped all the way down to negative 4.18. So basically right near the bottom of the scale. The bottom of the scale is negative 5. And now we had moved up off of that, and we're currently up at about 1.01. So we are above neutral, but if we are about to enter into a full-on alt season at some point in the next month or two, you'd expect that the entirety of this scale is in play. And from that perspective, it's not worth being too concerned yet at being at this level. I'd be more concerned if we're up at, for example, 5 or near that, which might suggest that a local top at the very least might be forming. Some consolidation might be needed. We're not there at this point. So I do think that Avalanche has plenty of room to work with here. We're consolidating, but I think all we really need is just another bullish impulse in the broader market. Bitcoin breaking out to new all-time highs, for example, or maybe even something like Solana breaking to new all-time highs. I want to talk in a minute about the interesting relationship between Avalanche and Solana. Something like that could send it up higher, at the very least up to year-to-date highs, and then eventually close in maybe on all-time highs. And if we look at the long-term risk, it's a similar story. We can see we bottomed out back here in August, pretty far in the negatives, almost down to negative 4. And now we're just below neutral. So again, the same idea. I'm not going to be concerned until I see us all the way up at or near the top of the scale. We're still only at neutral. A lot can happen with this. And it's probably not going to be a straight line either. If we see a continued alt season and Avalanche is rallying, it's probably not just going to go vertically up. It's probably going to go up. There might be some corrections, some consolidations, continue to go. That can help risk not just go parabolic and hit the top of the scale prematurely. So time will tell. I'll have to watch, but that's what I'm seeing when I look at these models, that both in the short term and especially the longer term, I think there's more room for Avalanche to work with this cycle at the very least. Now, not financial advice. You should make of these data as you will, but that's what I'm seeing when I look at risk. Now, I also want to talk about momentum as it relates to Avalanche. So this is our momentum bias indicator. And basically what it's looking at is whether or not momentum is biased to the upside, basically meaning that any moves down quickly get bought up and then momentum to the upside prevails, dominates, or it's biased upwards, versus biased to the downside. And what you'll see is that in the different phases of the market cycle, there are distinct behaviors that the MVI shows. In bull markets, you spend a lot more time up here in the green than in the red. And the trips back down the red tend to be brief. And then the opposite in a bear market. You have a lot of time in the red, and trips back into the green tend to be pretty brief. But then as you transition out of the bear market into the new bull market, you'll see this kind of oscillation around zero. This is kind of that reaccumulation behavior, where neither direction is massively winning over the other. You're just kind of reaccumulating, resetting before that next big explosive move can happen. So we got that first big leg of the bull market here, that we then have had a deep correction, and it looks like we might be setting the stage now for that next leg up. Not entirely dissimilar from what we saw back over here in 2021. A big leg up, there we had a much deeper correction than the next leg up as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of a reaccumulation zone, kind of out of a mini bear market here, reaccumulation, which then could lead to big explosive behavior like this. And something you can also watch is just when does momentum get extremely overextended? Because that can suggest that the most violent part of the cycle might be over, and that you're either going to have correction into downward movement, or at the very least a slowing of the trend, which can ultimately lead to a correction. So we'll have to watch and see. We're still not at that extreme of a momentum reading yet, but it is something to watch for. If we get back up here, I'll be watching this as it relates also to risk to see, are we massively high across the board on all of these? If that's the case, that might be more concerning. But again, it's good to be at positive momentum bias. It's just that when it gets too extreme, that's when you might want to get concerned, especially if risk is also really high at the same time. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about here is that relationship between Avalanche and Solana. So there's no explicit link. It's more of a correlation that's tended to exist throughout their lifetimes. So here in the white, we have the Avalanche price. Here in the teal, we have the Solana price. And then this formula that I'm going to put up here, this is the 180-day correlation between them. So basically 6-month correlation. What you can see is that by and large, for the most part, it is massively positive. So if you're not familiar with correlation, it's just basically a way of calculating or quantifying how much two things move together. That one's going up, the other tends to go up, one going down, the other tends to going down. And that would be a positive correlation when they're moving together. Negative correlation would be when they're moving in opposite directions. And it ranges from 1 to -1. And what you can see is that throughout the entirety of this time series, there's only a handful of times we've seen a negative correlation. That was all the way back here in August of 2021. Then we barely got a negative correlation here in November of 2023. But except for that, they've basically gone in lockstep with each other, or at least overall, they've been more positively correlated than not over a 6-month time frame. So that's where when you look at what's going on right now, we have a bit of a divergence going on between Solana and Avalanche, where Avalanche has kind of generally been down over here, where Solana has been sideways and now up. And so what you might expect is for Avalanche at some point to really reestablish this positive correlation that we've seen, especially like over here in the middle of really bullish phases. You might expect this to spike up again. What that might mean is that Avalanche is now rallying up to kind of, over this 6-month window, make it more of an overall positive relation with the overall positive movement that Solana is showing. Now, there's no guarantee of that, right? This could just all be spurious. This correlation could be meaningless and nothing happens. But generally speaking, it has been the case that where Solana goes, Avalanche goes as well. And in some ways, it makes sense. They both are in some ways targeting similar ideas. They're both supposed to be alternatives to Ethereum. They're both ones that caught on in more notable ways than some of the alternate layer 1 protocols that are out there. And so when you see Solana doing well, it would make sense that some of those profits would just naturally flow into the next thing that people think about in that category, which would be Avalanche. So just something I wanted to mention, and I'll be keeping an eye on this, that if that correlation goes back up, generally speaking, it stays up there for a while, which can mean that if Solana's been doing well, Avalanche might be doing well also. And then finally, just to talk a little bit about where Avalanche sits and should we be really concerned from a little bit more of a fundamental perspective. Now, I will say fundamentals don't matter in a bull market. So I want to be really clear. This is just how much they might matter as it relates to narratives that would go along with Avalanche. Getting too caught up in fundamentals can really lead you astray in bull markets. It's a very easy thing to think matters, but actually ultimately often ends up not mattering. But I wanted to talk about DeFi. So we're here on DeFi Llama. Avalanche is sitting at number 9 in terms of total value locked on the chain, up 20% over the last month, and relatively stable over the last week. And if you compare it to others in its general orbit, it's doing decently well. Now, it's not as explosive of growth as we've seen on some others, like, for example, Sui, or over here on Aptos or Core, or some of these other ones, but pretty decent. It's certainly holding its own. And what we're not seeing here is a massive exodus from its ecosystem. In fact, if we just zoom in here, and then if we denominate things in AVAX to basically account for the fact that Avalanche's price has been going up recently, and so that would be inflating the US dollar total value locked, even if nothing had happened on chain, we can see that it's been generally trending up over the past year, the amount of total value locked on its protocol. So that is a good sign. And that is basically something that can help feed into narratives, where if it seems like activity is picking back up on Avalanche, that can be a thing that gets people excited, makes them think it's going to be the next big thing, or that's going to be the next Solana. Money can pile into it as a result. All right, so to wrap us up, what I'm seeing is that though Avalanche has been maybe somewhat disappointing relative to some of the other assets that have been going up 100% or more since the election, it's been doing okay. And there's reason to think it has more room to run. From a risk perspective, that makes sense. From a momentum standpoint, I think that makes sense. And also just based on how we've seen it tend to relate to things like Solana, I think it also would make sense for there to be some continuation of this correlation that could come in. So not financial advice, you should make of these data as you will, but that's what I'm seeing with Avalanche right now. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over on X. I'll have updates for our models and more over there. You can go to our website, claritydigital.io, to see live data for our models and more.